Hey, everybody, welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And Happy New Year to everybody. This is our first podcast episode of 2024. I didn't do an episode last week. I had been sick. I got sick probably Christmas Day. I started really feeling like swollen glands and I had gotten congested. And the day after Christmas, I was just had my ass kicked, so I was not feeling well. And all week I was just tired and achy. And it wasn't as bad as last year. Last year I had to take 2 days, 2 weeks off rather. I missed two episodes because my voice was completely shot last year just from all the coughing. And this year, luckily, all the congestion just basically stayed in my head and didn't really move down into my chest. So I didn't really lose my voice, but I was kind of at a point where, like, even if I started talking on the phone to someone for more than a couple of seconds, my nose would start running and it would, I would get like choked up in the throat and I would have to cough and clear my throat. So it just wasn't a very pleasant week. Um, and it was right, between the holidays, right between Christmas and New Year's, and just didn't have the time, didn't have the energy. And then once I did start feeling better, it was probably like New Year's Eve, and I just did not have the energy or the desire to do an episode at that point. So I figured I'd just take the week off. But we are back now. So welcome everybody to 2024. This is episode 80. And I'm going to do something cool this week. But before we get to that, a few things. So I'm wearing my new t-shirt. It's Bigfoot with the rock and roll fingers. My buddy John gave this to me, my best friend of 35 years and frequent co-host on this show. So he got me this t-shirt. He got me some cool books too, which I'm going to feature on another episode, but one gift at a time. So cool t-shirt. Love it. Fits great. It's comfortable. It fits my body, which I'm very tall. So usually t-shirts that are extra large are tall, but they're also wide and it just I feel ridiculous. But this one fits my torso really nicely. It's long, but it's not too wide. So good job, buddy. Thank you. Um, yeah, so that's cool. Hope everybody had a good holiday season, safe holiday season. Hope everybody got what they wanted for Christmas and Hanukkah and all that good stuff. So tonight I want to talk about something that's sort of Bigfoot adjacent. So we're not really specifically talking about Bigfoot tonight, despite all my Bigfoot apparel that I'm wearing. But this episode, I wanted to do this one. I was going to do another episode, a listener submitted story about Bigfoot. Very cool story, uh, lots of detail. Um, but the listener, after we did some back and forth, she told me I could use her story. Got an email from her and she said, please don't share my story. She had some second thoughts and the community out there, not just the Bigfoot community, but just the internet at large can be very mean, very cruel. She just didn't want to be attacked. She said she had to think about her family, even though I wasn't going to identify her. I only know her first name. Um, but I wasn't going to identify her. I was going to change some details of her story so that no one could really figure out who she was. But she wanted me to withhold the story for now. She says maybe in the future I can share it, but for now she didn't want me to share it. Um, but in reading her story, it reminded me of other stories that I've come across over the years. And one of them was the Albert Osman story, the kidnapping story, where this Canadian trapper in the early 1900s got kidnapped by a Bigfoot and was like brought to a Bigfoot family camp. And, uh, and that also then reminded me a lot of these missing 411 stories, where the child who goes missing, and in a lot of the missing 411 stories, people will disappear and in many cases they're never found. The body's never found. The person, alive or dead, they're not found. Sometimes their belongings are found. Sometimes they just seem to disappear without a trace. Other times a body will be found later. And we've done some episodes on missing 411. I know Josh and Scott and I did an episode, and then my buddy Andy from Spooky Island Radio, we did an episode on missing 411 stuff. So we've covered that before here, and there are weird, very strange circumstances surrounding a lot of these disappearances. And a lot of times a body will be found weeks or months later in an area that had been searched multiple times. So search and rescue has been there, the family has been there, authorities have been there, and then one day there's the body, and it's like, well, how did it get there? Was this person alive the whole time and then just died there the night before, or did search and rescue miss it somehow? Very strange. But there's another sort of weird aspect to some of these missing 411 cases, and it usually revolves around when children or adolescents go missing. And when they're returned, they have a weird story to tell. And this is why I'm saying this is Bigfoot adjacent, because it doesn't really relate to Bigfoot. But a lot of these kids, and I have the missing 411 book, and I'm going to try to get it to show up on screen here. It doesn't want to really cooperate. Missing 411. I'll put a screenshot of it. But it's one of the David Paulides first books, and it is missing 411 Eastern United States. So I bought it obviously because I live in the East United States, and there are stories in there, and I've heard other stories from David Paulides um, regarding this. And there was actually, and that's gonna be the first story. There was actually a high profile case recently where this happened, and the overarching theme here is that these kids go missing, they come back, they're found a day later, or a couple of days later, or weeks later, and they will talk about a friendly Bigfoot, a friendly bear. Sorry, a friendly bear. So they talk about this friendly bear that took care of them while they were missing. So they're in the woods and they say a friendly bear took care of them. What does that mean? Bears typically aren't friendly. And what would a young child think of Bigfoot if they don't know what Bigfoot is, if they have no frame of reference? They see this, tall, big, hairy creature of the woods that stands upright. Um, they may think bear. So I'm going to go over a few of these stories today, just because, like I said, the user submitted story sort of had some of these elements to it of this caretaking. And sometimes in Bigfoot stories, and some researchers think that these creatures are bloodthirsty maniacs who just want to eat you, and they're wild animals who are going to kill you and attack you. But then we have stories like this, usually from children, where the creature, which is not usually named to be a Bigfoot, it's usually the friendly bear, uh, is involved. And there are some other instances where maybe they're not so friendly, and I'll get to a few of those stories. But I just want to read a few of these stories to show that there are these sort of friendly bear tropes in these stories, and why does it happen? Like, why are people saying like a friendly bear took care of me while I was in the woods? And we'll discuss some of that after I go through these stories, but I just wanted to get to some of these stories. So let me get to the high profile case first, and then I'm going to hit the book, and we will do some older case. Some of these are from like the 1800s, that David Paulides has pulled together. And before we go on, though, David Paulides is a controversial figure. People either tend to love him or hate him. A lot of people think he's a crackpot and that he pulls these things out of thin air and he puts these things together and he's looking for patterns where there are no patterns. Other people think, he's a genius and he's onto something. I really like David Paulides. I think I don't agree with everything he says, but I don't think you should agree with anybody 100% in life, whether it's a family member or a spouse or a politician or whatever. Like, you should not agree 100% on everything ever. But I really respect the work that he's put into this and just some of the dots he's connected. And I appreciate his vagueness. He never comes out and says this is a UFO abduction or this is caused by Bigfoot. All he's saying is like, look, here's this pattern, and there's these characteristics that they all seem to share that keep popping up. There's always berries, there's always water, there's always like a weather event, there's always like these characteristics that they all share, and they're mysterious. And of course, can some of them be explained if we had more information? Obviously, and he always allows for that. And I really appreciate that with him, that he's very open to, look, I'm not saying that this is that. I'm just saying with the information we know, it's weird. And if more information comes out, he kind of pulls them away from the missing 411 aspect. But until then, they're just weird. So just wanted to say that because I know people are going to have strong opinions on him. And I know a lot of people steal his work, and I'm giving him full credit here because I do watch his videos, I do read his books. I have lots of respect for him. So, David, if you're watching, I have much respect to you. I'll link to your channel below as well, so you get all the traffic because you've done all the research here. This is your research, and you deserve the credit. And I respect your work, but I do want to highlight this because I do think these stories are interesting. And again, I'm not saying that any of these are Bigfoot. It's just something that, makes you think and say, like, what is this friendly bear story that we keep hearing, or just bear in general? And like I said, some of the stories I'm going to go over today, they're not so friendly. So let's get to the first story, which is the high profile one. Okay, so this one, like I said, high profile, and I'm sorry for all the ads here on the screen. I just can't really find a good news site that doesn't have diarrhea of advertisements on either side of the article, but here we are. So I will read this. And this one is from back in 2019. And again, this was a fairly high profile case. I remember seeing this all over the news. So I will read this for you guys. This is Missing Boy 3 years old, says he was protected by a friendly bear. A 3-year-old boy who was miraculously found 2 days after disappearing in freezing temperatures has claimed he was looked after by a bear. There were fears for Casey Hathaway's safety when he wasn't found soon after he went missing from his grandmother's backyard in North Carolina on Tuesday. But rescuers did eventually locate him on Thursday night, and he had something surprising to tell them. He had been kept company by a friendly bear. And here's some pictures of Casey and his family and a bear, in case anybody reading didn't know what a bear looked like. Casey's aunt, Brianna Hathaway, added, he said he hung out with a bear for 2 days. God sent him a friend to keep him safe. God is good. Miracles do happen. They're not quite sure if the boy really was saved by a friendly animal or was imagining it, but they are grateful he was able to stay protected in -6 degrees Celsius weather. North Carolina does have a high population of black bears, so it's certainly possible he encountered one. Hughes said, we brought Casey to his family just like we said we were going to do. I could not be happier by the way this turned out. Hughes said he believed the boy moved around during his time in the woods. Casey was playing with 2 other children in his grandmother's backyard in Ernle when he went missing. Authorities had been concerned that Casey wasn't adequately dressed for the cold temperatures. Volunteers had been helping with the search, but he had been told to stay away Thursday due to heavy rains and strong winds. Casey was taken to a hospital to be checked over, with his mother saying he was doing well and had already asked to watch Netflix. So, happy ending here. The child was found. He went missing. Uh, but the child comes out of the woods, and Craven County Sheriff Chip Hughes said the youngster told him he had a friend in the woods that was a bear that was with him. So, what do we make of this? So, this is going to be the first story that we talk about here. And I just wanted to step aside and let everybody know that -6 Celsius is like 21 degrees Fahrenheit. So, below freezing, chilly, 21 degrees. But we have a child here who's 3 years old, lost for 2 days in the woods of North Carolina. Uh, you can see pictures of him here. He's a little guy, um, had to have been scared. I mean, this is woods, thickets and wooded areas, uh, and saying that he was kept company by a friendly bear. And don't know what to make of that. And as with any story, I mean, you're going to have Bigfoot, you're going to have skeptics saying what they say. And it is very possible that this child imagined this. Kids will be in the woods, they'll be scared, they may go into shock. Uh, but this kid was missing for 2 days. And I don't know a lot of adults who could survive in the woods for 2 days from the city here. But here you have this 3-year-old who survives for 2 days in the woods, says a friendly bear helped him. And the thing that gets me is why is it always a bear? And you'll see from other stories that the bear motif comes up a lot. There's some other stories doing my research. I'm not going to get into them today, but there's other stories of wolves, the friendly wolf, uh, or a tall man with a dog head. So almost like a dog man creature. But kids who get lost and come back and say there was a friendly animal who took care of them, it's usually like a bear or a wolf. And it's not like a deer or a raccoon, or it's like something you'd see in a Disney movie where you have a friendly deer who'd come over and take care of you, or a raccoon or a squirrel or a fox. It's always a bear, this big bear. And even here on the East Coast, we don't really have grizzly bears. We have black bear, which are still dangerous, but they're not really aggressive for the most part. They're usually easily scared off, and they're not going to take care of a child, a missing child. So it's very weird to me. But we're going to get into some more stories, and again, if this was an isolated story, you say, okay, fine, this kid hallucinated or he made up something in his mind. Uh, it was a dream, it was a hallucination. It's just his imagination, trying to cope with the trauma. And he says, hey, bear, took care of me while I was out in the woods. And again, if this was an isolated story, if there were no other stories ever about this, you'd say, fine, that's all it was. But there's other stories. So we're going to get into those. And for this one, I'm going to pick up the book and I'm going to read from the book. So just bear with me. Get it? Bear with me. There's no bear with me right now. But I'm going to read some of these stories. A few of them are a little bit long, but I'm going to go through these and we will see what we can come up with here because some of these are weird. Okay, so the first story that David Paulides brings us is about Katie Flynn, and she was missing in the summer of 1868 in Walhalla, Michigan, and she was 3 years old at the age of her disappearance. So I'll read this story. Henry Flynn ran a lumber camp in the forest just outside of Walhalla. During the summer months, his wife and daughter, Katie, would come from the city and stay with him. Part of Flynn's job was to drive a team of horses carrying the lumber up the hill to the mill, drop the load, and then come back to get additional trees. During June of 1868, Henry would have Katie ride the horse on his way up the hill, and she would then dismount at the top and run back down the hill on an adjacent trail. On one of these trips back down the hill, Katie didn't make it. The mother thought she was with the father, and the father thought she made it back to the houses at the bottom of the hill. When Henry returned home at the end of the night, he learned that Katie never returned. A search was immediately initiated. Henry checked the path that Katie was taking and saw her tracks slowly merge with the path of a huge black bear. So think of that, huge. Keep that word in mind because we're going to keep seeing that adjective. As luck would come Mr. Flynn's way, two hunters wandered into camp and offered to assist with the search for their daughter. The men scoured the area with the aid of torches made of wood shingles. The search for Katie went into early in the morning and was given up for that night. Early the next morning, Mr. Flynn and a group of searchers went back out looking for Katie. At approximately 4 p.m., the men heard a feeble cry in dense underbrush. The men started to make their way through the brush and toward a river when they heard another faint cry. Just before the men reached the river, the article stated that the men saw a huge black bear jump into the river and disappear across the other side. Katie was found standing on a tree that was lying on the ground and crossing the water flow. The girl was picked up and taken back to camp. Katie had a badly scratched face and hands, but that was about the extent of her injuries. When Katie got back to camp, Mrs. Flynn asked why she didn't run away when she had the opportunity. This story was replicated in the April 24th, 1932 Ludington Daily. Here is Katie's response. Big Dog came up to me, took me in his arms, and walked away with me. So again, like big dog, bear, wolf. Hmm. Noting one of her shoes was missing, the parents asked her where it was. The big dog ate it, she replied. The Katie Flynn story was again printed in the July 6, 1961 Ludington Daily News. In this copy of the story, it had the following as to Katie's rendition of the events. So this is Katie talking now. In answer, well, this is not Katie talking, but this is her story. In answer to questions, the child said that after her father had left, she had played a little while in the sand when a big black thing, not a bear, not a dog, a big black thing, came along and played with her. Then it held out its paw, and she caught hold of it, and it had walked away with her. Just before dark, it had left her for a while, and when it came back, its paw was full of wintergreen berries. The bear ate some of the berries, and she ate some. Then it scraped a big pile of leaves close to her and lay down close to her, and during the night had tried to cover her with its body. The quote above needs to be reviewed at two different important points. So this is David Paulides speaking here because I'm reading this. I believe that Katie was trying to explain that she did not understand what had walked up to her by her first statement, big black thing. A person's first statement about an event is usually a very revealing and honest representation of a stressful event. It would appear from that first statement that Katie was having difficulty understanding what she was observing. Katie's explanation about the mammal making a bedding area, covering her and keeping her warm is not indicative of bear behavior. Bears are not nurturing, warm creatures that cuddle children. As I've stated multiple times throughout the book, berries play a continual role in the disappearance of people. This story is another example of that, as the mammal left and returned with berries for Katie to eat. I do not know what took Katie, but I do not believe it was a bear. Other articles indicate that a wolf took her, also not a possible scenario. A wolf cannot pick berries, place them in its paw, and carry them back in that paw. This story is remarkably similar to an incident that occurred on July 7th, 1868, in Ludington, Michigan, very close in date and geography to the Walhalla incident. The name Henry Flynn is in both articles, so we must think this is the same incident. We are including both renditions of the story so that the reader can understand what might have occurred. The other story that Katie's mimics is the disappearance of the 2.5-year-old daughter of Millard Davis, who lived in Boyceville, New York. On or about May 9th, 1888, Davis disappeared and was found 24 hours and 2 miles from her residence in a deep rural valley. Davis told her family that she was taken by a big bear and slept with that bear through the night. This story was found in the May 15th, 1888 edition of the New York Times. Something took Katie against her will. Searchers saw something dark and hairy jump into the river as they approached. Most felt it was a bear, except the victim herself. Bears do not take little girls, coddle them all night, and carry them in their arms. Katie Flynn had something very unusual happen to her in the summer of 1868. Okay, so a really weird story. I mean, here again, you have a 3-year-old, just like in the first story, and this is a girl this time, but she says a big black thing came up to her, picked berries, made her a bed, uh, carried the berries back in its paw. Now, bears eat berries, uh, but they're going to eat them off the bush. They're not going to pick them with hands and then carry them in a paw back to the child. It might carry them in its mouth. Same thing with a wolf. A wolf is not going to pick berries. A 3-year-old is very easy prey for any large predator. So a bear, a wolf, these things are not going to go get berries and bring berries to the child. And I know there's examples of animals in nature who take care of other species and the young of other animals or other species. It just seems weird to me. They're saying huge black bear prints, so big footprints. Uh, even the search and rescue people saw something big and black and covered in hair jump into the river and sort of flee. Uh, so very strange story. And again, I'm not saying it's Bigfoot. I don't know, and David Paulides is not saying that it's Bigfoot. It's just interesting the terminology used, a big black thing. Uh, and again, you're talking, this is in the 1800s. You have a small child who sees a large, hairy animal that takes care of her for the night and feeds her berries and makes her a bed and covers her with its body. That doesn't sound like bear behavior. It sounds like primate behavior. And in the 1800s, there was no word for, I mean, they didn't call Bigfoot Bigfoot yet. It was wild man or hairy man. So, but a 3-year-old might not know even that terminology of wild man or, hairy man or Sasquatch. So they're going to say it was a big bear. It was a big bear took care of me. So I thought that was interesting. So let's get on to the next story. Okay, so this next one is just the story that was just referenced, the Davis case from Boyceville, New York. Uh, First name is unknown, just last name is Davis. Missing on May 9th, 1888. Age of disappearance, 30 months. So this child was a little less than 3 years old. There was one article about the disappearance of Mildred Davis's daughter from the family residence in Boyceville, New York, in the Catskill Mountains. The article was in the New York Times, May 15th, 1888. Millard's daughter disappeared, and a search went through the night looking for the girl. The day after she disappeared, a trout fisherman 2 miles from the family's residence was in a deep ravine and spotted the girl standing in the middle of the brook. The fisherman took the girl to the parents, where she was questioned about her ordeal. The little girl was never known to tell stories, and in fact is too young and innocent to practice deceit. When her father asked her where she had slept all night, the little one answered, "In the woods with a big bear, Papa." She was closely questioned, but the child adhered to her story that she had slept with a bear in the woods. And people in Boyceville believed that the little girl did really meet with a bear, and not knowing what it was, went up to it, and for some reason, the beast refrained from harming the wanderer. This story is very similar to other stories in this book of children claiming to be abducted by a bear. Sometimes they sleep with the bear, and sometimes they are merely carried away. In all of the instances that are cited, the victim is never seriously injured. I find this and other stories about bear taking children highly suspicious. I believe that the children believe what they are saying. I question whether it was really a bear. Readers need to take note of where the Davis girl was found, standing in the middle of a creek, a location where no tracks or footprints will be found. So now we have the story of the Davis girl, also gone missing, and also says, "Oh, I was just with a big bear." These children don't seem afraid of the bear. They don't seem traumatized by, like, holy crap, a giant black bear like stayed with me all night. This girl was found in the middle of a stream. Um, and again, water plays into a lot of these disappearances that Paulides talks about in the Missing 411. There's always like water or a water source or a lake. So very interesting. And yeah, they couldn't really find tracks. This girl's in the middle of the water, but she's talking about a bear. So again, uh, very unusual behavior for a bear to take care of a child. Uh, you, we we as humans want to see good. We see bears, we see bear cubs, and oh, they're so cute, and animals want to protect us, and they really don't. They're not these vicious, bloodthirsty psychopaths who are out to kill us. But I can't imagine a bear coming across a toddler and not seeing that as a meal opportunity, or taking care of it. And again, this is going back over 100 years, 150 years, in two cases, very, very similar location, very close to one another. The kids very similar in age. All these kids are around 3 years old so far. And just interesting that they're saying bears. Bears came and took care of me and fed me and helped me sleep. And it's just very strange. So we'll get some more explanations, but I want to go on to the next story. All right, so this next story is a little bit more recent. But again, we're talking about a 3-year-old girl. Her name is Nicole Renaud, and this is in Quebec. So I'll read the story. Nicole and her mother were staying at their summer home in Beurre-le-Renne, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. My French is not very good. The home backs up to open space and heavy forests. Nicole's parents explained to her the dangers of the woods, and she absolutely knew never to go into the forest alone. On July 3rd, 1950, Nicole was visiting the home of a friend and playing in the backyard. At some point, for an unexplained reason, Nicole walked into the woods. Nicole's friend ran into their house and screamed at the mother, "Mommy, Nicole has gone into the woods." The mother ran into the backyard and immediately ran into the woods looking for Nicole, but she could not find her. The mother now ran to Nicole's home and got her mother to help in the search. The two women searched for almost an hour and then called authorities for assistance. Almost 1,000 people searched the woods behind the Renaud's neighbor's home for 3 days. The only thing of value that was found were alleged bear tracks 1,500 feet back into the woods. So alleged bear tracks. Searchers never saw a bear, and there were no tracks anywhere near the homes. Regardless of this fact, a June 6, 1950 article in the Edmonton Sun stated the following: "Police definitely decided that little Nicole Renaud was devoured by bears and are abandoning the search for the 3-year-old child." Residents stated that bears had been seen in the past, but none recently. The police, questioned about the history of bear attacks in the greater Quebec area, stated, "There have been no bear attacks in recent memory in the Quebec area." On June 8, 1950, in the Saskatoon Star, Phoenix, Nicole's mother, made the following statement. Mrs. Lorenzo Renaud stated that she believes her daughter was kidnapped. So here's the case summary. And this is David Politis talking. When researching this case, I was deeply saddened for the Renaud family. The police in Quebec made several catastrophic mistakes in the investigation of the disappearance. The first major mistake was to assume that bears ate Nicole. The police had no evidence that she was eaten. They did not find any blood, tissue, or clothing of Nicole's in the woods or recent bear scat. There were no bear tracks anywhere near the homes, and neighbors had not seen bears in months. The police force made a public statement that they hadn't even had a bear attack in anyone's memory in the Quebec area. The police also stated that they had black bear only in the area around Quebec. Black bear are not known as fearsome creatures that regularly attack people. In fact, it's a rare occasion when someone is attacked by a black bear. Mistake number two by the police was calling off the search for Nicole Renaud after 3 days. Even with all the manpower that they could absolutely muster, 3 days is too short of a period to call off a search for a 3-year-old girl. It is confirmed that 2,000 researchers scoured the woods for Nicole in addition to low-flying airplanes and support teams. A June 6, 1950 article in the Schenectady Gazette stated that search crews found a small piece of cloth that they believed came from Nicole's dress. All other articles that I researched stated that researchers did not find any evidence in the woods. Searchers, rather. I believe that the greater question that police needed to understand is why Nicole Renaud went into the woods and why Nicole's mother felt she was abducted. Not finding any viable evidence in the woods, not finding any evidence of bears in the woods, and knowing that parents were in the woods searching and calling for her minutes after she walked into the woods makes it very difficult to understand how a bear could have grabbed her when she walked into the forest. There is no way Nicole could have walked 1,500 feet in the time it took parents to get into the woods. She would have had to have been walking and heard the calls if the bear option was still viable. In the many articles I reviewed for this case, there was never one mention of the police utilizing hounds to track down the supposed bear. If there was a bear involved in the disappearance, hounds would find the closest bear. Police never tried this tactic, probably because they knew a bear was never involved. I believe Nicole saw something that didn't scare her, but something that intrigued her, but something that eventually took her life. So yeah, some interesting aspects of this case. The mother believes she was abducted. They called off the search after 3 days. They assume it was just a bear because bear prints had been found very far from the home. But if you're finding bear prints 1,500 feet into the woods, but nowhere near the wood line, nowhere near the yard, nowhere near the house, how did the bear take her? And she's 3. I understand kids can go fast, but they can't go that fast. So how did she get so deep into the woods where a bear would then just snatch her? Her friend's mother was in the woods very shortly after she ran in the woods. It sounds like she ran in the woods. Her friend ran into the house, grabbed her mother. How far could she have gotten in a minute or two? Even if we say 3 or 4 minutes, I mean, she couldn't have gotten that far where she wouldn't have heard the screams. And if she were attacked, if something had attacked her, had bitten her, had dragged her off, she would have been screaming. So her friend, her mother's friend, her mother eventually, when she got there, somebody would have heard screaming of a child. There would have been evidence of a struggle. There would have been, like Politi said, blood or tissue or clothing. There would have been some evidence that an attack took place. And we see this a lot in missing 411 cases where they say, oh, it must have been a bear attack. It must have, they were out hunting and it must have been a bear or a moose or a coyote or a wolf or a bobcat or any of the other things out there that could kill you. And in so many of these cases, there's not a shred of evidence to prove that. There's no disturbed ground. There's no belongings. There's no blood. There's no body parts. There's no clothing. There's no bloody clothing. There's just nothing. So it's almost like these people are just picked up and carried off or just sucked off the earth or disappear off the face of the earth. So very weird. Just very weird. And again, I'm not saying any of these are Bigfoot. We just don't know. But it's they all have this sort of running thread of bear and huge bear prints. And black bear out here on the East Coast don't tend to get very big. I mean, of course, there's always like the weird rare specimen that will get a little bigger than the others, but black bear here don't tend to get very big. So to hear them say huge bear prints is interesting. And this was in the 1950s. There's not a lot of information out there. He's going off the articles that he could read. What was not being shared with the media? where the police are saying after 3 days, nope, bear, close the case, stop the search after 3 days for this poor little 3-year-old girl who could be alive for a week in the woods. She, as long as she's finding water, she could live 5, 6, 7 days in the woods easily. I mean, not comfortably, but she could still be alive after 3 days. So to call off the search is a little bit weird without any evidence. I mean, if they found her body, if they found pieces of her body, they can say, okay, we know a bear got her. But just a couple of bear prints in the woods doesn't mean that a bear took her. Why did the mother think she was abducted? I wonder if there was some other pieces of evidence that the media didn't get a hold of or didn't report on, and that's why the mother thought she was abducted. So was she abducted by a person? Was she abducted by something else? It doesn't sound like this was a bear attack. So where did she go? And again, as Polite has mentioned, what drew her into the woods? This little girl who knows not to go into the woods. And I get it. 3-year-olds will do what they want to do sometimes. But usually when they disobey and break rules, it's because something is tempting them. There's something intriguing them. There's something that says, hey, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I got to go check this out. So what lured her into the woods? What took her? So that's the question. So very strange, very sad story because she was not recovered, but the mother thinks she was abducted, and the police, after 3 days, just decided, yeah, we're done looking. We don't have any evidence that it was a bear, but we're just going to say it was a bear, and we're done. So very sad. Okay, so the last story I'm going to read for this episode comes from Vermont, West Townsend, Vermont. Shout out to John and his lovely wife, Monique, because she's got family up in Vermont. They go up there a lot. So this is the story of Carl Herrick, and he was 37 years old when he disappeared. So let me read this one to you. West Townsend is approximately 10 miles northeast of Bennington. It's a rural area with thick woods surrounding the community. The town is on the east side of Glastonbury Mountain, the location where Paula Weldon disappeared. So a lot of these stories will reference other stories in the book. So I'm not going to read the whole book, obviously. I'm just trying to pull the ones that have this running thread through it. On November 23rd, 1943, Carl Herrick and his cousin, Henry Herrick, went to West Townsend for deer hunting. At some point during the hunt, the Herricks got separated, and Carl never arrived at camp. Henry notified law enforcement almost immediately. In an unfortunate turn for searchers, snow started to fall the first night that Carl was missing. So let me stop here for a second, because I just want to point a few things out. Um, so one, you have this element of people who are familiar with the woods. These are adults. They're in their 30s. They're hunters. They know what they're doing. They're familiar with firearms, how to use firearms, how to take down animals, how to take down prey. But one of them goes missing. And then there's the weather event. I mentioned this early in the episode because a lot of these missing 411 cases have a severe weather event, either during the disappearance or during the search and rescue. Like a big snowstorm will come in or a huge rainstorm will come in, and it really hampers the search effort. So I just wanted to point that out while we were talking. So let me continue. The search for Carl continued for 3 days without finding any trace of the man. Late on that third day, Carl's cousin, Henry, found Carl on the mountain, lying on the ground, motionless. Henry walked to the body and found Carl's face black, with minor scratches on the arms and hands. There were some alleged huge bear tracks on the ground in the area. So there we go again with like huge bear tracks, not just bear tracks, but like huge. Carl's rifle was found leaning against a tree 70 feet away. There was one expended round lying on the ground near the rifle. A November 27th, 1943 article in the Dunkirk Evening Observer said the following. Acting coroner Carlos Otis said that the bear had scratched Herrick about the head, but killed him by squeezing. The victim's lung was punctured. So I want to come back to that too, because that's a little weird. A black bear didn't use its claws, didn't use its mouth or teeth. He had a few scratches, but he ultimately died by being squeezed. I mean, I know there's bear hugs, but bears typically don't kill by squeezing. So interesting. So I'm not going to read the case summary. Again, this is from David Politis. After conducting thousands of hours of research and reading countless documents about a person's cause of death, I have never read about a bear that squeezed an adult to death. Ditto. Many of the articles surmised that Carl shot a bear, placed his rifle against a tree, and walked up to the body to find the bear still alive. All hunters are trained to keep their weapons with them, walk to the body, and touch the eye with the barrel to ensure the animal doesn't flinch. It's hard for me to believe that Carl placed his rifle against the tree and walked 70 feet to a downed bear. So again, I'm going to pause here. You have experienced hunters not doing what they're supposed to do. And I don't care if it's a bear or a deer or a raccoon, like any wounded animal is dangerous. Like, and if you have a weapon, you're not going to leave it 70 feet away. You're going to go up to it and poke it in the eye with the rifle. And again, if it flinches, you pull the trigger and boom, you've got it right, dead to rights in the brain. And it's dead and it can't hurt you. It can't kill you. So very, very strange. Henry had told researchers that the pair were hunting deer, not bear. Even if Carl was charged by a bear, the likelihood of him shooting a huge bear only once and immediately dropping the animal would be minimal. A hunter would fire multiple times to ensure a wounded bear wasn't running around in the wild. If a bear charged Carl, I seriously doubt he leaned his rifle against a tree just before his demise. It's also extremely hard to believe that a bear would grab a person and try to squeeze him to death, especially black bears in the United States, which are not that large. Again, I've said that a couple of times now. They're not very big. They're kind of like big dogs. I mean, they're a little bit bigger than a huge dog, you know. So they're big, but they're not, you're not talking, 8 foot tall grizzlies here. If a bear grabbed a person, it would bite and claw him. There was not one mention on any report of a severe cut, bite, or wound to Carl, only minor scratches and no bite marks. The coroner stated that Carl had a broken rib that punctured his lung. The force it takes to break a rib and puncture a lung is exceptional, and I don't believe that a black bear in North America could accomplish this on a grown adult male without inflicting severe parallel injuries that would make it clear it was a bear. Carl left behind 5 small children. So again, we have this very sad story to end this episode. And again, lots of things just don't make sense about it. It's you have an experienced hunter who should know better. They were not hunting bear. So if he did come across a bear, he's not worried about, taking this down stealthily or preserving the hide for a trophy or preserving the meat to feed his family. This is a guy who's going to probably empty his weapon into this animal to make sure that it is dead, because one bullet is never a guarantee that it's going to take down a bear. So that's one. He just fires one shot. Then he puts his gun down and walks over to the bear. And again, all of these things are possible. I just want to stress that people do make mistakes. People get cocky. People drink. Their judgment gets flawed. So all of this is possible. I don't want to say that this is impossible, that any of this happened. It's unlikely. It's not very plausible, but it's possible. So again, you have an experienced hunter not looking for bear, possibly encounters a bear, shoots the bear only once, puts his gun down, goes over to the bear. The bear is not dead. It plays dead, maybe. He goes over to the bear. The bear, instead of biting him and using its most powerful weapons, which are its claws and its mouth, its teeth and its jaw, to bite and claw and tear this person apart. I mean, anybody who's been in a bear attack, you're clawed, you're bitten. That's what happens to you. You don't get squeezed to death. It's not a boa constrictor. This isn't, it's just weird that a bear, if it's trying to kill this guy, decides to just squeeze him until he stops breathing. And again, you're talking about a young, healthy man. Black bears are not that big. Again, we're not talking grizzly. We're talking about something that's, you know, like I said, like a large dog, 300 pounds, 400 pounds, maybe. Uh, it's not inconceivable to fight back against a black bear. So how incapacitated would he have had to be to have this bear just crush him and hug him until his rib cracked and punctured his own lung? It's just very weird. Again, not impossible, because people make mistakes. People do stupid things. I get that. But then you have to say then the bear also did stupid things, and instead of the bear doing what a bear would do, which is bite and scratch and claw, it decided to hug this guy to death. It's just very, very odd. And there were no bite marks. There were some scratch marks on the face, but this guy did not look like or doesn't sound like he came out of a bear attack. So what did this to him? Could have been a person. Again, but you're talking about a person hugging him to death and crushing his ribs. It's just it's weird. And nothing here says Bigfoot necessarily or overtly, but it makes you wonder, like, what did this to him? You know, if you're talking about a Bigfoot, you're talking about something that doesn't necessarily have long, pointy claws and a big snout full of teeth. You're talking about a large primate. So if Bigfoot punched this guy in the chest, then maybe you could imagine that his ribs would break and puncture his lung and he'd die from that. So again, I don't like jumping to that conclusion, but it's one of these things where you have facts of a story and the main explanation doesn't really make sense. You're saying, oh, it was a bear. Okay. But when you look a little closer, it really starts falling apart. The story falls apart, and you start saying to yourself, was this really a bear? Or was this something else? And if it was something else, then what was that something else? Yeah, it could have been another person. Uh, Maybe the murder weapon is gone. Maybe somebody had a sledgehammer with them and cracked this guy in the chest and ran away. Again, forensics back then was not as good as it is now. We're not talking modern, these aren't modern stories, but we're talking about huge bear prints. What does that mean? Uh, Black bear don't get that to be that big. So how big could it have been? I mean, I've seen bear prints in the Adirondacks. Josh and I come across them all the time, and some of them can be big, but I wouldn't describe them as huge. They wouldn't be out of the ordinary. You say, okay, that looks about the size of what I would expect a bear to be. But you have these people going into the woods and finding these people or these bodies and saying there were huge tracks, huge bear tracks. And one of the things we hear in the Bigfoot community a lot is when, officials, whether it's the local sheriff's office or the police department or park rangers or whoever it is who's in charge, who gets notified, a lot of times they just try to convince you saw a bear. It was a bear. It was just a bear. Just let it go. And it's just one of those stories that, um, you got to kind of laugh at after a while because, yeah, people can mistake bears for something else, but how many people are just really not realizing it was a bear? I mean, something comes at you in the woods, your first thought's going to be, is it a bear? Until you realize it isn't, until some detail emerges, or you could see its face, or you could see how it's walking, and you say, that is not a bear. And I don't care if you're a city person, if you've grown up in the country, I think most people know what a bear looks like. And if you're in the woods, I don't care who you are, you could take someone who's never been in the woods before ever and plunk them down in the woods. And if a bear starts running at them, they're going to be like, holy crap, that's a bear. If there's something that's 8 feet tall, walking bipedally, has the face of a man, and is swinging its arms and running after you upright, that's not a bear. Bears can't run upright. They don't look like people. Like, again, from a long distance, corner of your eye, fleeting glimpse, you might see a bear and be like, "Oh man, was that Bigfoot?" But I don't know. I think if you're getting a good look at these things, you're going to know whether that's a bear or not. And it just seems like these last two stories just seem to have the authorities saying, "Okay, it was a bear. Just move along. It was a bear. Don't worry about it. Bear ate the kid. Bear killed this guy by hugging him to death." Weird stories. So, and there's more of these, and I can go into more of these if you guys like this. I'll research some more, but these are just the few that I found in this book, just the interesting ones, because I found two where it was like this friendly bear sort of thing, and then two others where maybe not so friendly. Friendly bear, and I don't know if these are bear, I don't know if they're Bigfoot, I don't know what they are. I don't want to say they're Bigfoot, but it's one of those things where you hear these accounts, and if it doesn't act like a bear and doesn't sound like a bear and doesn't do bear things, then what was it? What else is in the woods that's that big, that is covered in brown hair and can pick berries and make a bed and take a child home or crush a man to death. Just weird. Just weird. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think there are friendly bears out there? Do you think these were hallucinations? And that was another thing I was going to talk about. Like some of the kids, you can again say maybe they're just hallucinating or they're dreaming or this is just their trauma kicking in and they saw something so horrific and their brain just said, no, it's a happy, fun, friendly bear. I don't know. I don't know, but it's just weird that you have these stories from 150 years ago. You have a story from 2019 and they sound identical. 3-year-old lost in the woods and it was a friendly bear. A friendly bear took care of me overnight. Papa. So again, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Was this bear? Was this Bigfoot? Was it something else? Who knows? So until next time, everybody, check out our merch store. We got t-shirts and sweaters and hoodies and all sorts of cool stuff. I'll put the link in the description below so you guys can find that. If you have a story that you'd like to share, email me at jason@oddanduntold.com. I will get back to you as soon as possible. And again, everything is kept confidential. Again, I've had a lot of people reach out to me and share their stories and tell me they just don't want me to share them. They want me to know about them. They want to get it off their chest, but so many of them have just told me, please don't share this. I don't want my name getting out there. I don't want people identifying me. It'll cost me my marriage. It'll cost me my job. I did have this story lined up to go this week, and she wrote to me and changed her mind. So I'm respecting that. And I'm saying, I'm not going to share your story then. She said, maybe one day, but she wants to protect her family. She wants to protect her privacy. And even with changing her name and changing the location and changing many identifying details, people get scared. So I tend to believe these stories because these are not people looking to get on YouTube and make a name for themselves or get famous. I mean, these are people who are traumatized. These are people who went through something. And I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was actually Bigfoot or something else, but I believe these people. And if you have a story, if you just want to share it with me, share it with me. I promise it will not get shared unless you give me explicit permission to do so. It will stay just between us. But if you want to share your story, jason@oddanduntold.com. If you want to come on the show, you're more than welcome. In the meantime, everybody, question everything and rock and roll. It's like Bigfoot here.